It says, but the native people and environmentalists are conceding defeat. We seem, it says, to have accomplished so little to stop the logging, said Mary Assunta, a Malaysian affiliate of the international conservation group, Friends of the Earth. And here a statement from the environmental minister of Malaysia. Even without logging, all human beings exploit nature. We cannot eat the egg without cracking the shell. And while conceding that loggers had caused damage, he blamed slash and burn cultivation by some tribal groups for most of the deforestation of Borneo. And finally, this article concludes. By 1991, even the International Tropical Timber Organization, which environmentalists regard as pro-logging, warned that Sarawak would be denuded within 13 years if cutting was not drastically reduced. May I ask you, who would have noticed when the first tree fell in that part of the world? Probably the Panan. We're now reading about the Panan who will have to move to another place because they cannot survive where they are. And in fact, my judgment is there will not be Panan in the next 15 years. In Canada and the United States and virtually every Indian nation is in a battle with the anti-Indian movement and similar forces. And either the government of Canada or the United States or both are involved. We have so inured ourselves, protected ourselves from considering the implications of the slightest developmental act, that we have all come to believe that it is simply for the common good. And if it hurts a few, at least the common has been served. But I ask you, if you don't have a Panan who knows how to raise a tree to its fullest length, and that tree happens to contain a medicine which will make your life better, is it not valuable to consider the Panan should have a place and the tree should have a place so that you have a place? I don't ask you to cry over the Panan. Many hundreds, if not thousands, of nations have disappeared over the thousands of years. But that was often done in an unconscious way and without consideration about the possibility that one loss would have profound effects all across the world, as is now possible. Pierre Trudeau and the collapse of the Soviet Union. I knew you were waiting for this. The anti-Indian movement in Canada was sparked by Pierre Trudeau, your Prime Minister, with the issuance of the White Paper on Indians in 1969. It was in that paper that he declared that Indians are the same as all Canadians under one law. Equal rights, equal responsibilities, one law. He also declared that Indian Canada was now open for exploitation. And he did follow this with then the subsequent leasing of virtually all of Indian Canada to corporations, to tin, copper, gold, wood, gravel, water, other hydroelectric. Virtually all of Indian Canada was leased on 99-year leases with options. I don't know if this comes as a surprise to you, but those of us who observed it 20 years ago or so, 27 years ago, felt that this was probably the worst thing that could ever happen to the Canadians, quite apart from the Indians. because the Canadians never had a choice about the future of all of those resources, or whether even Canadians asking the question, should we ask the Indians? The Nicaraguans chose not to ask the Indians, they chose to kill them. And I must say, with as little drama as possible, and hopefully not hyperbole, Pierre Trudeau chose not to ask the Indians either. Canada became an independent state, as I'm sure you all know, and perhaps some of you applauded it, on April 1982. But perhaps you were not aware, for years leading up to that august moment, Indian nations throughout Canada sought the opportunity to enter into negotiations with Canada for a place at the political decision-making table of the Federation as equal partners with all Canadians. That request was utterly, profoundly denied. And so, for those of us who are outsiders observing such a thing, we would say, if they had to ask to get in the first place, they must have been outside. If they were denied the opportunity to get in, they must still be outside. So the conclusion some of us must draw is that by virtue of the decision of Canada, they decided that Indian nations all will remain outside of the Canadian Federation. And therefore, those of us who observed that there were treaties concluded between Britain and many nations provided for the Canadian territory, which turns out to be 1/3 of the territory of Canada. That means the remainder is 2/3, and that is Indian Canada. And I must point out, that's where the vast majority of the raw materials are today. Trudeau declared himself a constitutional genius and the father of New Canada. I say only the fact. I don't mean to diminish the importance of his work. Canada declared its dominion, and Pierre Trudeau proclaimed himself the father of New Canada. But what of Indian country? With these strokes from 1970 on up to 1982, in effect what was said to all those who were comers, Indian country is open for your exploitation, available to any and all, under the law of the new state of Canada. Many Indian nations sought to prevent this. They did it over hydroelectric questions. They closed roads over timber questions. They would do all sorts of things in an effort to prevent the confiscation of these raw materials. And many people in the press would say, oh, these people, don't they understand the importance of these things to Canada? Why don't they just drop all of this and join us all? I would remind them, the Indians asked to come in, and they were denied. So what are they to do now? Trudeau moved